today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about what is healthy masculinity and how do you apply it to your marriage. So now it's time to break out. And breaking out means embracing all of who we are as human beings. And as human beings, we encompass a full range of emotions. Now I want you to look at it as a man. If I want to leave the world a better place for the next generation, what areas of life am I going to leave the world a better place? Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. And today we're talking about living the new masculinity. I have actually a couple of versions of this episode. It might even be better to say living the new masculinity is partly about time is on my side. And you're going to understand what I mean as I go through the episode. But let's just start with the opportunity here. This is where we take the theory we've been talking about in this podcast for weeks now. And if you haven't been listening for weeks, it's okay. We're going to get you up to speed. We take the theory and we apply it. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is where we talk about how do you live consistently in a way that it is healthy masculinity without losing yourself, without slipping back into destructive or negative masculinity, toxic masculinity, if you will. And, you may not have heard much about toxic masculinity. In essence, toxic masculinity is masculinity at the expense of women in particular, but I would say at the expense of others. Toxic masculinity is almost a form of bullying if we really refined it down. And so what is healthy masculinity? And how do you live that way? And how do you do it? Healthy masculinity is, if I were going to boil it down and just get these episodes are all an exploration of healthy masculinity, but if I were going to boil it down, it's about embracing your humanity first, right? We did this, we talked about the man box with John Schinnerer, my new friend, and the man box the man box cuts us off from part of what it means to be human. The man box tells us there are certain feelings that we should not be having or that it's not safe for us to have. The man box tells us there are certain behaviors that don't work. There are certain things that we need to do if we're going to be men, if we're going to be fighting men, if we're going to be men who can protect our family. There's certain feelings that we don't have. And even though the man box is being steadily dismantled, it's still present. It's kind of like the man box has gone from being a wooden box to being a cardboard box to almost a paper box. And now it's time to break out. And breaking out means embracing all of who we are as human beings. And as human beings, we encompass a full range of emotions. As human beings, men have what's defined socially as feminine qualities. And feminine qualities, we've made clear in previous episodes, are ways of thinking and operating that are associated with a brain that has evolved in estrogen. And if you've been listening to the episodes all along, you understand that estrogen brains are more ecological, that estrogen brains explore emotion more deeply for a number of reasons, whereas testosterone brains that are floating in testosterone tend to be more linear. They tend to be more goal-oriented. And what I'm saying to you here is, in the new masculinity, we've internalized, let's call it ecological thinking, in the same way that women have become masters of being linear and goal-oriented. If you think I'm wrong about that, just go into any corporation today. Women are kicking ass and taking names in a linear and goal-oriented way because for thousands of years, they've had to deal with toxic masculinity. So they've learned how to fight masculinity on the ground of being linear and goal-oriented. Well, if we're going to be healthy, just as women have embraced all of who they are, their inner goal-oriented nature, their inner relational nature, we need to do the same because that's part of being human. Yeah, it's true. We have a brain that makes it harder for us to read micro expressions in body language than, let's say, an estrogen floating brain, but we can still do it. We have a brain that likes to be linear, that likes to get stuck in one lobe or the other, but we can still move between the lobes. It's not impossible. It takes work. It takes habits. It takes being aware of our own emotions. There's an episode coming up with Dr. John Schinner all about that, so look forward to that one. It takes owning that it's not that we don't have enough time, it's that we choose how to use our time. It takes creating within the way we choose to use our time to show up for our partners. It takes within using time to show up for ourselves, time to rest, time to recharge our spiritual, mental, emotional batteries, our physical battery. It takes all that. It takes time to invest in being part of a group of men as well as a group of people. It takes time to acknowledge that we are not alone and we don't have to be alone. Imagine looking back 6 months from now and knowing that you had made the time for yourself, made the time for your marriage, made the time for your family, made the time for your friends, and still showed up effectively at work, still made money, still progressed your job. In fact, I submit to you that when we as men embrace our whole human spectrum, all our emotions, everything about who we are, that when we do that, we're happier. When we do that, we're more fulfilled. When we do that, we're more effective at work. If you're like most men, your calendar is full, but you feel a little empty. You're always doing, but you never really feel like you get there. Even when you get the promotion, it doesn't feel satisfying anymore. If you're like most men, even when you get the bigger house, you want the next size up. What if you could carve out space, not just for your responsibilities, but for you, for your conscious creation of self, your conscious becoming of the man that somewhere in there you really are, not the guy that you were taught you should be, not the guy you think you should be in your marriage, but the real you. Well, that, my friends, is the path to true leadership and love. Time is the most honest reflection of your values. What I mean by that is the way you use your time is the most honest reflection of your values. If you are spending 10, 12, 14 hours a day at work, then that is a reflection of your values. By the way, that isn't necessarily bad. But if you do that for 40 years, it might not be very balanced. If you don't make time for who you want to be, you'll keep being who you were trained to be. What do I mean by that? As men, we are trained to limit our emotional range. As men, we are trained to, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what can you do about it? Let's talk about it. I want you to do a calendar audit. How would you do that? It's kind of like doing a where does my money go audit. I'll share something personal with you, all right? You ready for this? At one point, I went to a 12-step program called Debtors Anonymous because like most people, I was in debt and I wanted to end it. And the first thing they have you do at Debtors Anonymous is they have you you walk around with a little notebook. Probably nowadays you walk around with a little phone and you note down every penny that you spend. If you did that with your time, if you sat down and noted everything you do throughout the day, what do you think you'd come up with? Now, the interesting thing is in Debtors Anonymous, they argue not that you need to spend less, but that you need to earn more to have everything you want. How does that carry over into time? Well, you can't make more time. There's 24 hours in a day, but you can adjust the way it's distributed. In an earlier episode, we talked about time management this way. Scientific studies show that when we are well rested, that when we charge our own batteries first, that we actually get more done. We work more efficiently. So it's not that you need to spend more time in order to accomplish things. It's that the time that you spend needs to be used with maximum efficiency and maximum sense of purpose, with a sense of flow. So first, I want you to audit your time. And once you start auditing your time, I want you to look at where are the areas in my life that I'd like to be investing more of my time. Actually, what I want you to do next is I want you to look at what are the areas of my life that I know I want to invest time in myself. Because what Rich just told me is that when I invest time in taking care of my physical well-being and getting enough sleep, that when I invest time in talking with my partner, that when I invest time in thinking before I act, that everything else goes more smoothly and more efficiently, that the synergy starts to happen there. That's the first thing I want you to do. And I want you to do this without taking an action. Because as men, we tend to take these thoughts and say, all right, let's do something about it. I don't want you to do anything about it. I just want you to look at it. Next, I want you to look at the different roles that you have as a masculine being. There are 4 basic roles we're going to go over here. Let's talk about the first. There's provider. You're not just a provider. You're a whole person. And what does provision mean? As a human, your connection to meaning comes from purpose, from a sense of spirituality, from integrity. As a human, provision means so much more than coming up with money, right? Money. Remember that money is a symbol, first of all, and that before money, there was simply how we showed up. Before money, in Little House on the Prairie, where there's almost no money, people are busting their butts to produce food. People are busting their butts to take care of the children. I'm talking about, before money was really the center of all things as it is now. So I want you to get the provision isn't just about money, and that maybe you're in a marriage where your partner earns more than you do, that's okay because you provide so much more. But I want you to make sure you are providing so much more. I want you to, in your audit, look at how much time am I spending, how much time am I contributing to the well-being of my marriage and my family? Am I providing in that way? And also, the linear mind is uniquely suited to taking what there is and making more of it. And so what are the ways that you take what you have, the money that you have, and you make more of it? It might be that you shop for the best priced vehicle when you go to buy a vehicle, or it might be that you invest it someplace where it's going to have a high return on income. But provision isn't just about bringing the bread to the table. It's a loaves and fishes trick. How do you make more loaves and fishes? I want you to think about it this way. And as you go through your inventory, look for where are the opportunities that I'm missing chances to do that. I want you to look at your role next as a man. All right. First, you're a human. What does provision mean in the human context? Now I want you to look at it as a man in the world. What's your connection to the world? What's the principles and values? If I were to frame it this way, as I say this, what's your role as a man in the world? It almost seems kind of vague to me. The only way that I really connect with this is if I want to leave the world a better place for the next generation, whether it be my children or if I don't have children, just the next generation, right? If the rule I'm going to live by is leave it better than I found it, if that's a principle for me as a man, how do I bring all of who I am, my strength, my drive, my clarity, the values that represent me to play? And in what areas of life am I going to leave the world a better place? Because let's face it, right? I'm unlikely to be the Pope or the president at this point in my life, but there are definitely areas where I make an impact. The work that I'm doing here on Rich in Relationship is where I can make an impact based on my experience, based on my skill set, based on my values, based on the principles, based on the things that I'm passionate about, based on the principles of taking bad and making good out of it through helping others. This is where I make my impact. Where are the areas where you take all of who you are and can make an impact? And what is your vision for the world? And I want you to get off of being on a mission and start thinking about, as a man, what am I devoted to? I am devoted to helping people to have caring communication that builds emotional intimacy and deep connection in such a way that they no longer experience destructive conflict, blame, anger, and hurt from one another. That's my devotion. That's what I'm devoted to. And all of who I am goes into that. What are you devoted to as a man? First as a human and then as a man, all right? And I bring strengths to that. Now next, assuming you're married, it's going to be as a husband. As a husband, How do you create safety in your family? I'm not talking about protection. I'm not talking about how strong is your kung fu. How do you create safety for your partner? Because without safety, there can't be trust. And without trust, there can't be vulnerability. And without vulnerability, there can't be intimacy. And that's really what we all crave as human beings, is it not? How do you create safety? How emotionally available are you? Right? As a human being, we have the full range of emotions available to us. Have you, in thinking of yourself as a man and then as a husband, somehow cut yourself off from certain emotions? And how can you show up in those emotions? And look for future episodes to learn more about that. And also, how do you share leadership with your partner? The old model was the man was in charge, my way or the highway. But what we know in reality, even if we look at Father Knows Best and old time shows like that, we know that women led in the areas of their strengths. It's no different today. Your partner will lead in her strengths and you will lead in yours. Or if you're in a same-sex marriage, their strengths and you will lead in yours. The question is, do you know when to bow to their strengths? And do you know how to lead even if they won't bow to yours? And do it in a way that feels safe to them. And then lastly, I want you to think about father. All right. Father is a model, a teacher. A father is an emotional coach to his children. Think about that. I have a couple I'm working with right now. They're divorced and they're having some trouble with their child. And we're talking about, and he's in puberty, and we're talking about how can the father communicate to this young man he's becoming what it means to be a man today. And it's causing the father to do some deep digging. And we're pulling from other cultures and looking at models that they use for the way he can create connection with his son in a way that feels safe to both of them, that honors that they are first humans, second men. Getting out of the man box that we talked about with John Schinner, getting out of it, we hope, paper thin walls, is about reclaiming all of who you are as a person, as a man, as a husband, as a father. The man box says, suck it up, stay strong. Don't have vulnerable feelings because nice guys finish last. But you can't have a successful partnership if you live like that. So how can you leave your family if you're cut off from half of who you are, half of your being, half of your emotional range? You can't. You can't connect emotionally with your family unless you're connected with those feelings that are associated with vulnerability, with hurt, sadness, fear, loneliness, all the other emotions that as men we're discouraged from really leaning into. I want you to not only take a time inventory, but I want you to take an emotional inventory. I want you to take an emotional inventory that leans into, what am I actually feeling right now? First thing in the morning, what am I feeling? Middle of the day, what am I feeling? If you're not sure of what a feeling is, I promise you, a feeling is not, I feel like the economy really isn't going very well. All right, that's using feeling in a sentence without actually having a feeling. Like feelings are mad, sad, glad, or afraid. There's actually thousands of feelings, but the four basic boxes are mad, sad, glad, and afraid. I want you to check in daily and see which of those four boxes, and if you can boil it down to something more defined within those four boxes, even better. Within mad, angry is obviously mad, but frustrated is a form of mad. Blame might be a form of mad, though it's leaning a little into other feelings. It might be under afraid. I actually think hurt should be one of the feelings because I don't see where hurt feels into mad, sad, glad. I guess afraid is grounded in, I've been hurt before, I'm afraid I'm going to be hurt again. So maybe it goes there. I want you to do some regular grounding. If you don't have a mindfulness meditation or prayer practice, just try doing some regular breathing. All right, I want you to get in touch with your body and do deep box breathing every day. Box breathing, before you go to sleep at night, you'll sleep better. Box breathing is breathe in, hold, breathe out. Roughly 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. You do that a few times, you will feel your whole body reset. I'm afraid if I do it now, I'm going to reset a little too much. I've done it on the show before, and people have noticed me go from this to this. I want you to try a witness practice, all right? I want you to do some emotional journaling when you get really upset in particular. When you get really upset, who would you have liked to have been in that moment, and what was in the way? I have a client who I'm going to call Brad. Guess what? His name is Brad. Guess who he's married to? That's right. He's married to Gwen. He never had time for Gwen. Gwen was furious. Like, Brad, we don't even do date night anymore. What's going on? He looked at his calendar and he realized that doing this inventory, he realized that his calendar reflected his boss's priorities, his client's priorities. It reflected his golf interest, but it didn't reflect any of his basic human needs. And his time with Gwen was almost non-existent. So he began blocking out 15 minutes a day just to check in with his emotions and do a little breathing. He did that for a few weeks. And he noticed that when he was with Gwen, he was more present. That's all he did. He was more present. He was more emotionally aware. And Gwen relaxed a little. And then with that awareness, that if he just showed up a little more relaxed, a little more aware of his own emotions, a little more managing his own self, that Gwen would be more present for him, he started spending more time with Gwen. They resumed date night, and they made rules about date night. We're not going to talk about work unless we need to unload at the very beginning of date night in order to start date night, because sometimes we go to date night with things still on our mind. And Gwen softened up some more. He started taking better care of himself after a while, and he felt more energized. So his emotional awareness sharpened. The sense of safety started to return to his relationship. Trust returned, and he was feeling more available because he was taking care of himself. And their relationship started to rebloom. Well, that can happen to you, just like Brad and Gwen. It just takes creating a new habit, maybe every 3 or 4 weeks. And once that habit's in, bring in the next habit. Maybe 2 new habits every 3 or 4 weeks if you've got that kind of stamina. Want a space to explore your roles? Come join our Rich in Relationship community. Reach out to me. I'll connect you to other people. We're starting groups. We're connecting people so that nobody has to be alone again. We're creating a community of couples who are committed, who are dedicated to having joyful and prosperous marriages. Hey, if you like what you're hearing here, I want you to subscribe. I want you to share it. Help us keep growing this station, this channel, so that we can help more and more people. And in the meantime, have a wonderful day and an awesome tomorrow.